Good evening, hello and welcome to Brass Tacks. We're coming to you live from the CNN News 18 and Federal Bank Primetime Studio. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is at the G7 summit in Italy. It is the first visit since the elections last week when he secured an unprecedented third term. He's already met with French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He's also due to attend a meeting with President Joe Biden of the United States and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy. At this time when Europe happens to be at a crossroads with respect to the war in Ukraine, where it's clear now that Russia has the advantage. It's been well over 2 years since this war began. Ukraine is being slowly but surely pushed to the sidelines of this war. The question now remains, how should Mr. Modi and India respond to this rather tumultuous time in Europe? All right, I want to first go across to our colleague Sanjay Suri, who's joining us live from Apulia in Italy, where this summit is happening right now. From India's perspective, of course, the fact that this is Mr. Modi's first visit after his third term, an unprecedented third term after Jawaharlal Nehru. This is the first Prime Minister to get a straight third term. But what is at stake for India? The Prime Minister has met with the French President, the British Prime Minister. He's due to meet with President Joe Biden as well as the Italian Prime Minister. At a time when Europe is at its crossroads, what does India's role and its heft mean in the evolving situation between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, a lot will depend upon the outcome of the bilateral with President Biden. That is the moment we've been waiting for. And of course, as you say, there have been a number of significant bilateral meetings with the French President, the British Prime Minister. There will be others through the course of the day, and there's not a lot of time left. We are just about 2 hours short of winding up this summit, and that will be time then for the concert and for the song and dance. So there's a short window left where there will be this bilateral meeting, likely, we are told, between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. That really will set the scene both in bilateral terms between India and the US and also more broadly over the position on Ukraine. President Zelensky had a meeting with Prime Minister Modi earlier today. Mr. Modi called that meeting very productive. These have been exchanges that have been continuing now between Zelensky and Modi for some time now. They met at the G7 in Hiroshima last year and they have spoken since. That has not led to the kind of results that could have been hoped for. Perhaps that was too optimistic a hope that India could play a hand in bringing a resolution to this, given the intransigence that has been built into this situation, and given also, as you are pointing out, the fact that Russia has been making gains of late. There will be a review now for India, what it can do. Certainly, India is not going to take a position against Russia. We've seen that from the low representation from India coming up at the Swiss Peace Summit. But very clearly, India does want to keep Zelensky on board, keep the doors open with Ukraine. On the other hand, of course, we've seen a renewal of a pledge to fund Ukraine from frozen Russian assets. This is now a situation where Ukraine is on the back foot again, as you were reporting, but NATO and G7 are not letting go of Ukraine in a hurry. There is fight left in Ukraine yet.
It is also a time of flux in Europe. We know that the French president has asked for elections to be called early. That's going to happen later this month. And from whatever the polls are suggesting, the far-right party, the French National Front of Marine Le Pen, seems to be leading in the polls. In Britain, we know there are polls next month, early next month. Again, Labour is all set to form a new government there. Even across the Atlantic in the United States, Donald Trump seems to be leading Joe Biden in some of the critical states, what they call the swing states. At a time such as this, what does Narendra Modi coming back for a third term, albeit his numbers are reduced compared to the last two terms, what does that mean in the sort of power equations that we're seeing in Apulia at the G7?
Well, we're talking about reduced numbers for Modi. BJP now is in a minority and it's in a coalition government, but that is not an unusual scenario here at G7 at all. Italy is a minority coalition government. So is Germany, so is Japan and Canada. These are all coalition governments, so it's not an unusual scene at all. So the fact is that we are seeing a great deal of flux in Europe. There is a swing to the right, though the last EU elections did not bring as big a swing as some had anticipated. What we did see was the one winner was the host of the G7. It is the Brothers of Italy, led by Meloni, that won a very substantial number of votes. She got, her party got 29%. That's 4 times as much as the party got in 2019. She's been the one winner here. Everyone else is on the slide in Europe with very low numbers in Germany. In France, we've had an upheaval, as you were pointing out. Again, Kishida is down in popularity. Trudeau's down in popularity. Biden has his back to the wall. And there was one remark made here that this has been a summit of one triumphant woman and 6 dead men walking.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Sanjay Suri, thank you very much for joining us live from Apulia in Italy, where the G7 summit is happening right now. Let me now open this up to our panelists. Sanju Verma, National Spokesperson of the BJP, is joining us. Sanjay Jha, political analyst, joining us. Vivek Kajju, former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Sushant Sareen is senior fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. And Michael Kugelman is director for South Asia Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Sanju Verma, first things first. So the opposition is mocking this whole visit by the Prime Minister, saying this is a reduced majority. It's a Prime Minister who's been cut down to size. He's no longer invincible. He's going to Italy at a time when Europe itself is in a bit of a flux. France is going to elections. Britain is going to elections. You have the European elections that have just happened recently. And far-right parties in Germany, in Italy, in Holland, for example, have all asserted themselves. So the opposition's contention is, why is the Prime Minister going at a time such as this when his own majority has been cut down by what, 60, 63 seats?
You know, Zaka, first and foremost, thank you and your colleague Sanjay Suri. I think you put the entire thing in its right perspective. You know, without being verbose, let me just say that while the opposition can pat itself on the back saying that the Modi government on a standalone, could not notch a majority. We are about 32 odd seats short of that magical 272 number. Be that as it may, don't forget that in 2021, the incumbent party or the incumbent leader lost in Germany and Japan. In 2022, the incumbent party lost in Brazil, South Korea, and Colombia. In 2023, the incumbent party or leader lost in Thailand and Spain. And in 2024, the incumbent leader or party lost in Indonesia and South Africa. In fact, in South Africa, the incumbent party and leader lost power for the first time in over 3 decades. So the reason I'm giving this context is to tell you that amidst a geopolitical scenario where incumbent governments or leaders have been pushed to the wall and have seen their majorities crumbling, Narendra Modi and Modi 3.0 still stands tall. You like it or you don't, Narendra Modi is Prime Minister for the 3rd time running, and that is no mean achievement by any yardstick. Now, coming to whether he should have gone to, attend the G7 at Apulia in Italy, I just have this to say, that almost every year since 2019, Narendra Modi has been an invitee and he has chosen to attend. And I think the reason for that is more than any other reason, the basic premise on why Narendra Modi keeps getting invited to the G7 summit, I think lies in economics. the number game. There was a period in 1970s and 1980s when the G7 accounted for over 60% of global GDP. Today, the G7 accounts for barely 37 or 38% of global GDP. And when the G7 on an average is not growing at more than 1.7%, lo behold, you have India, which has an average GDP growth in the last 3 years of 8.3%. In the last financial year, it was 8.2%, and last quarter, it was 7.8%. The numbers speak for themselves. And very quickly, look at what India has to offer to the G7. I mean, a middle class of more than 432 million people is more than 6 times the size of the entire population of the United Kingdom. And I think also the fact that with more than 65% of our people being less than 35 years of age, we are a very young country with a lot of promise. So I think the Indian diaspora with Narendra Modi at the helm, being toasted by G7 is something that we should be proud of, but I'm not surprised that it's happening because of the reasons I just mentioned.
Sanjay Jha, the fact is that the world is in a flux. Rishi Sunak is all set to lose. The Conservatives are all set to lose in the UK. In France, President Macron has called for early elections. It seems like the French right, Marine Le Pen's party, the French National Front, will win those elections. Even Mr. Biden seems to be on a sticky wicket. He's trailing currently in about 6 or 7 swing states against Donald Trump. At a time such as this, for the Prime Minister to come back with a renewed mandate, albeit it's a smaller one compared to 2019 or 2014, fact is, he is in a league of himself. I mean, he is an elite company that for a third term, the people of a country have voted a ruler back to office. So, for whatever that's worth, that has to carry some weight, Sanjay Jha.
Zaka, nice to be on your program again. I hope I'm not interrupted. I want to make a few quick points following the conversation that just preceded me. Point number 1 is that Mr. Modi is 160 seats less than what he very condescendingly, with a lot of political arrogance, broadcasted before the elections were announced. Let's get real about that. Let's respect the verdict of the people of India, wherein Ayodhya, which was the epicenter of Mr. Modi's campaign, which he has now the unprecedented distinction of being India's first prime minister to be given a notice by a very dodgy election commission for hate speech. The truth is the Ayodhya verdict is a telling commentary on what the people of India think of Mr. Modi and his political party. The defeat at the hands of a Dalit candidate from Ayodhya tells you that India is saying no to Mr. Modi's attempt to indulge in social polarization.
You think at the G7 they're talking about that?
Yeah, I'm coming to that. I'm just setting the context. I requested you not to interrupt me because the preceding panelists spoke for a long time. I'm just setting the context.
Go on.
Okay. Here is the point. That what Mr. Jairam Ramesh said, by the way, was not why Mr. Modi is going to Italy. He was just letting you and the viewers know that here is a prime minister whose government has been authoritarian and repressive, and one that has brazenly been sectarian. Now let's come down to foreign policy. I can tell you this government, especially under Mr. Jaishankar, has been a foreign policy disaster. Forget the hype. I'll give you 2 examples. Let's look at Gaza. Such a ham-handed handling with the initial response to the violence that happened between Hamas and Israel, that today you have South Africa, you have Brazil, and you have China that have actually assumed leadership of the global South, at least where Gaza is concerned. And you can see the solidarity they have generated. Looking at the International Court of Justice's comments, India is actually literally a silent spectator because Mr. Modi's rather very skewed passion or love for Israel has actually been a foreign policy failure, in my opinion. Let's look at Ukraine. In Ukraine, India again had a historically, if you look at, I would love to hear what Mr. Kaju has to say, somebody whom I know and respect enormously. India, in both cases of Gaza and in case of Ukraine, has had a historical credential to actually have a role in negotiation. May not be troubleshooting to the conclusion, but in terms of negotiation. What have we done? We have sacrificed a very critical role at the altar of cheap Russian oil.
You're a perennial pessimist. You are a perennial pessimist.
No, let him finish.
That is who
finish.
you are.
Even pessimists
You
can
are a
finish their
perennial
thought.
pessimist.
Even
That is who
pessimists
you
can
are.
finish their thought, ma'am. Let him finish. Let him finish. Yeah.
He's been going on and on, Zaka.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I've been listening
so
to his
did,
monologue.
So did you. So did you.
He's making zero sense.
Let him
He's
finish.
making zilch sense.
Let him finish. Thank you.
Yeah, since I'm getting 15 seconds more, this is the primary question. It is about the moral legitimacy. Mr. Modi's party has got in alliance a government. His party is the single largest party. But don't forget, when you have actually not even visited the state of Manipur burning, 200 people dead.
The debate is not on Manipur.
1 year.
Zaka, you cannot allow this man to digress on every debate.
He can say what he wants. Let him finish, please.
Yes, but you have a topic of discussion
that's fine.
Today, right?
That's fine. Let him say what he wants. Let him finish, please. Thank you. Yes, so are you done, Sanjay Jha?
Yeah, Zaka, this is my point. That a prime minister of a country occupies a very august position, and it needs to be delivered at home, not just become a spectacle.
The prime minister does not need lectures from a suspended leader like
you. Vivek Ajju, when the prime minister goes to the G7, are other leaders, other world leaders talking about Manipur and talking about reduced mandate and etc., or are they looking at him and saying, well, you know, in the democratic world, very rarely does a leader get a third term?
Zaka, I'm not in politics. Let me make that quite clear. So I don't want to be finger pointed by either of the representatives. I'll try to give you as dispassionate an analysis of how I see the situation as is possible. The first point is that the international community and leaders in particular are interested in knowing how stable is the incoming government. That is the thing, that when they deal with an interlocutor, they want to know. And that is what diplomats are supposed to advise them, that this particular person in authority will continue or he will not. When I was serving as a diplomat, that was a question that our political leaders posed to me. The person that I'm dealing with, is he there to stay? So that is a question that they would have asked their foreign policy experts, and different experts would have given them different kind of advice, but certainly they would have told them that for the time being, Mr. Modi is not in trouble. Apart from that, the next issue would be that will Mr. Modi continue with the policies that he had pursued in the first two terms, given the fact that he has a reduced majority? Now, again, different experts of different countries would have advised their leaders differently. For the time being, it is evident that at least politically, Mr. Modi is signaling to the country, to India, and to the world that he is fully in authority. He has not changed any of his political team, and that is a clear signal that he has sent.
Okay.
Now, on the policy issue, I think things will have to unfold as we go along. Certainly, the first file that he signed showed that he was concerned about the poor. He has shown this concern earlier, but people will wait and watch to see, to look at the budget, to examine whether there is a shift, and if there is a shift, to what extent is there a shift. I think Ms. Verma was absolutely right when she said that India has a huge market, and that market is something that interests people, interests the West. It has done so for a couple of decades now. But that market needs access. So if you change policy, you shift gears, then the size of the market naturally is impacted, and the content of the market is impacted. So I think as Mr. Modi is seeing world leaders, these are issues that would be in their mind. Also, on the two burning issues for the Western world, apart from the issues of the outreach, that is AI, energy, Africa, and the Mediterranean, I think the war in Gaza and the Ukrainian uh, crisis are also of concern. And there I don't see that India has much room for a maneuver or much room for change. And I, for one, feel that India's policies have evolved reasonably satisfactorily
Okay.
in both these contexts.
Okay. Let me ask Sushant Sareen. Fundamentally, Sushant, at the end of the day, the West started quoting India, in the words of George Bush. India is the only counterweight, possible counterweight to China. Has that in any form or fashion changed? Because now you have the Quad, you have an alignment between Japan, the US, India, and Australia. Ultimately, whether it is democratic ethos, whether it is interest aligning, leave aside the current conflicts. These are, topical, these are pressing matters for the temporal right now, whether it's Gaza or Ukraine. But ultimately, in the long term, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, the ultimate question and ultimately the bottom line is this: if the West needs to sort of counterweight against China, there's only one country in this region, and that happens to be India. Does that change in any form or fashion?
No, I don't think it changes at all. In fact, that position is only going to be buttressed as we go forward. But the question is, how much does the West or the Americans and some of the other countries which are seeing a major threat emerge from China, how much they are up to the task? So I don't think India is going to become a hired gun for anybody. But yes, to the extent where it converges with our interests to build up, countervailing forces to China, we'll certainly be want to be part of it. But I don't think we are going to be a Pakistan, bleeding ourselves for the sake of somebody else. I think we will have our own interests at the strategic level. We will have, for example, it's not just about the Indian Ocean. We are just as much bothered about what happens on our land borders with China. So it's not as we are going to play somebody's game on one side and not going to, leave ourselves defenseless on the other side. And I think the reason why I'm saying this is because, look, the good thing which has happened in India over the last 10 years, especially over the last 5 years since Dr. Jaishankar has become foreign minister, is that we are not following a woke foreign policy. Like many people in the Indian opposition would want us to do, follow that very woke kind of foreign policy that just because some students in Western universities have gone crazy rooting for Hamas, that India should be doing something similar. We are not going to do it. We don't have too much skin in the game, but we will try and see how our interests are best protected. Now, the South Africans want to drag somebody to court. They're free to do it. And that's their policy. I don't see why we have to take the lead from the South Africans or the Brazilians or anybody else to do something like that. We will do what serves our interests, just as we will do that in the Ukrainian case. We don't like the war in Ukraine any more than anybody else. In fact, we would rather that this war was to end tomorrow. But the question is that, again, we have to make do with a situation which is presented to us and make do in a way that protects our interests as best as we can. Now, if it hurts somebody's woke sentiments, that's just too bad for them. But I think India always has tried to protect its own interests, even during the Nehruvian era. Those wonderful years when we were batting for right to self-determination of everybody else. But when the Soviets invaded Hungary and Czechoslovakia, we just simply kept our mouth shut because we didn't want to take on the Soviet Union. We protected our interests even at that point of time, just as we will protect our interests even at this point in time.
Okay.
And people need to learn to deal with it. If they think that India is going to be a country which is, going to let itself get bloodied for somebody else's games, I don't think that's going to happen. But in this particular summit, I think they would want to check whether the Modi 3.0 with a reduced mandate is going to be as firmly in resolve to protect India's interests, or whether they can nudge it, push it, pressure it into giving some ground. I think that is something which we'll have to watch out for. Let
me ask Michael Kugelman, what is the view from Washington? Because clearly, at the bilateral level, from a strategic interests point of view, clearly, there's alignment between the United States and India, from the Bush years to Obama, now, of course, under President Biden. But particularly in the last couple of years, there have been divergences as well, whether it is on Ukraine, whether it is on the war in Gaza, or even for that matter, this whole business of, Khalistanis, and, India, of course, sees that very, very differently. So when the Prime Minister is coming with a third term, albeit with a reduced majority, coming to the G7 and meeting all of his contemporaries, how is the United States viewing this? How is the Biden administration viewing this? Because you have an election in 6 months, and from whatever the polls are showing, Mr. Biden is on a weak wicket.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. No, the Biden administration, including President Biden, are very happy to see Prime Minister Modi at this summit. Quite frankly, I think it's a bit of an unnecessary argument whether Modi should be there or not. He certainly should be there. I mean, this is not a summit about Indian domestic politics. It's a summit comprising some of the world's top economies, talking about some of the biggest global issues of the day. And India, of course, is currently the fastest growing major economy, and it's the fifth largest economy on the whole at this point. And of course, as we all know, it's a very consequential global player that's been very active in all of the issues, or many of the issues that are being discussed at the summit. So I think it makes perfect sense for Modi to be there, or whoever happens to be the prime minister of the moment in India, whether it would be Modi or anyone else. So I don't think that's an issue here in Washington, as you note. The relationship is in a very good place. Indeed, the Khalistan issue, the transnational repression issue, I think has been a bit of an anomaly. That is a tension point, a very real one. But the trend lines for the relationship, the trajectory is very strong. And on that front, I think that the U.S. sees this as an important opportunity for there to be an encounter, or even if a brief one, between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, in advance of an expected series of meetings next week, I believe, in India, right? When we now know that the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, will be going to India to meet with his counterpart. And you'll also have the number 2 official at the State Department, Kurt Campbell, who will be going there as well. And I think this is all very important, because there have been some observers that have been concerned that the U.S.-India relationship could lose momentum this year, because India had its very long election campaign and of course the US is now going into a campaign mode. Concerns that the relationship could sort of get lost in the shuffle during that period. So I think it's important that Biden will be able to meet with Modi, and they'll have these high-level meetings in New Delhi next week, I believe. So no, absolutely. The short answer to your question is that the administration very much would want to see Modi at the G7, and you'll see how he'll be received. I'm sure the body language will be very strong and warm, just like we've seen with Modi's interactions with the other leaders that he's met with. Clearly his standing has not been impacted, or should I say that his standing, as seen by the international community, has not been impacted by his reduced mandate. That's quite clear. That's in part because of how the world views Modi. It's also in part because of how the world views India as a very strategically, commercially, diplomatically significant country in this day and age.
All right. I have some details of the Prime Minister's address at the G7 Outreach Summit. This is what he has said, and I'm paraphrasing. He's explained the general election result to the world leaders who've been gathered there. He told them that this is the first in 60 years that an incumbent has been voted back for a third term. He has said, and I quote, "It's my good fortune that the people of India have given me the opportunity to serve them for the third consecutive time. In India, this has happened for the first time in 6 decades. The blessings that the people of India have given in the form of the historic victory is the victory of democracy. It's a victory of the entire democratic world. And just a few days after assuming office, I'm extremely happy to be present among all of you friends." How does this weigh in, Vivek Karju, with all of this stuff that's been going on, particularly in the last couple of years or so, about democratic backsliding, institutions under threat here in India, opposition being sullied, etc. Now you've had an election, 640 million people have voted, and Mr. Modi's mandate has been reduced by 60-odd seats. No one's complaining that the elections are rigged, or the election has been stolen, or whatever have you.
Look, I think the world leaders, as I submitted to you earlier, look for stability. They are not concerned whether Mr. Modi has won a third mandate for the first time in 60 years. That might play very well domestically, and some of them may be a little interested in this. But when it comes to safeguarding and promoting national interests, these issues don't matter. I agree that any Indian Prime Minister at this stage of our country's development would be welcomed as long as he is perceived to have stability. Any Indian Prime Minister, and Mr. Modi is someone they've known, the world leaders have known for the last 10 years. So there would be a degree of comfort with him, a degree that they would expect of predictability in his policies, but that is something that they will be examining very closely, they and their advisors, as in the coming weeks and months, because they are conscious that the mandate is reduced. It will not weigh heavily on their minds, but it is a factor. Certainly, it will be, which will be taken into consideration by them. Now, the last point that I wish to state is that India is the most populous country in the world. Apart from the China factor, which is a security issue, on global issues such as climate change, for instance, India is critical to the world. There can't be any resolution, any true resolution of the climate crisis if India is not on board.
Mm-hmm.
So our weight in the world, the fact that we are the fifth largest economy, the fact that we are 1.4 billion people and growing, itself makes the Indian Prime Minister a person that has to be engaged with great seriousness.
Okay.
Because the decisions that he takes on various issues impacts the entire world.
Okay, let me ask Sanjeev Verma, you know, while at the strategic level there is an alignment of interest, no doubt, the West needs India because it's a counterweight to China. But what about the recent episodes, whether it is, you know, this Pannu issue, the Niger issue, Canada, the US, UK, Australia, the Five Eyes countries seem to have taken grave offense to the fact that India has got to a point where it's trying to, quote unquote, eliminate citizens of those countries on their soil, and they've taken grave offense to that fact. Is that just a bump in the road, or is that something that calls for course correction?
Zaka, you know, I will certainly answer what you asked me. You are the anchor, so I'll leave you aside. But, you know, if I keep you aside, there are 5 of us on the panel. And, you know, barring one sore loser from a party that has again lost the general elections, at least 4 of us believe on the panel, including Mr. Kajju, Sushant Sareen and Michael Kugelman and myself, that Mr. Narendra Modi's presence was very much required at the G7 summit. The opposition can start flying kites, drown itself in pessimism. We don't care. Now, I'll tell you what. You know, I did not want this debate to be. Can I just finish, please?
Sorry to interrupt,
okay,
but
sorry.
No, I would like to make a comment. Please. I don't think it is fair for the representative of a political party to start including experts on the panel as being aligned with them. I think there are nuances that each of us has spoken which are not in alignment with what you have said. And that is a point that please take into account as far as your political debate with Mr. Jha is concerned. Confine yourself to this. We have spoken from our own perspectives, diplomatic and strategic.
Okay.
So I don't think it is fair for you to say that there are 4 of us, 3 of us with you.
Okay, let Sanjeev Verma finish your point. Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Mr. Kajju, I don't know why you took offense. If you heard me carefully, with no offense to you, I said we agreed that at least Mr. Modi should have been there. I was not discussing about the nuances. But if you got offended, too bad. I'm not going to apologize because I did not misquote you. So now let me finish what I was saying. Let me be very clear, Zaka. I did not want this debate to be a tutu meme about Mr. Narendra Modi's electoral performance. But since the suspended leader from the Congress party chose to speak about Manipur, chose to speak about the fact that Modi got 160 seats lower than what he spoke of, your audience needs to know, we have an international panelist in our midst. Your audience, which is the biggest stakeholder in these kind of debates, they need to know that the Congress scored 0 seats in Ladakh, 0 in Jammu Kashmir, 0 in Delhi, 0 in Madhya Pradesh, 0 in Daman Diu, 0 in Dadar, Nagar and Haveli, 0 in Andaman and Nicobar, 0 in Andhra Pradesh, 0 in Tripura, 0 in Mizoram, 0 in Sikkim, 0 in Himachal Pradesh, 0 in Uttarakhand and 0 in Arunachal Pradesh. And Rahul Gandhi and his Congress party got just 1 seat each in West Bengal, Odisha and Chhattisgarh. And look at the irony. Narendra Modi was in power in 10 long years. Rahul Gandhi and the Congress started screaming from every available rooftop that there is a huge anti-incumbency wave. Despite that, the BJP got 240 seats and 20-odd opposition parties who came together were still restricted at 234. That speaks volumes about Narendra Modi's popularity.
Okay.
After 10 years of being in power, the Congress was reduced to a measly 44 seats. Now, after putting numbers on the table, let me come back to the topic at hand. Jairam Ramesh tweeted a couple of hours back, I think 24 or 48 hours back, that it is not the Modi government, but way back in 2008, it is Manmohan Singh who was the voice of the global south. And I think he needs to be corrected, because Manmohan Singh spoke of the global south in 2008. They signed a preferential trade agreement with Mexico, Argentina and Brazil, but nothing was brought to fruition. The PTA with Mexico was brought to fruition by the Modi government. Out of the 22 international missions that were opened in the last 7 years, 18 of those missions were opened in South Africa alone. And of course, the African Union, consisting of 55 nations, was included in the G20, making it G21. So I think the Modi government has chosen to walk the talk. And last but not the least, when we talk of the global south, we need to talk about Caribbean nations like Belize, Bahamas, Bermudas, Haiti. We need to talk about oceanic countries like, Marshall Islands, Nauru, Vanuatu, or for that matter, Papua New Guinea. When Prime Minister Modi visited Papua New Guinea in May 2023, it was the first time that an Indian head of state chose to do so in more than 75 years.
Okay.
Today our trade with South Africa is $100 billion. It was not even $45 billion 8 years back.
Okay.
So look at the milestones that have been achieved
Let
in
Sanjay
the last 10
respond.
years.
Suspended leader from the Congress party, please respond.
Zaka, I like that one. That was a very cheeky one on your part. I liked it. But let me, Zaka, respond on 2 foreign policy points, which I think are more relevant for our conversation. Number one, I do believe that the bigger threat that everyone is talking about is the emerging Russia-China becoming a very unambiguous, strong, formidable alliance between them. And of course, you can add Iran to it. And is India probably overbought, to use a stock market term, in terms of believing that since it is the only bulwark against China, are we then probably also taking a few big risks that could have a serious military repercussion down the line? And could you rely on your partners to back you out? And this is a conversation that I think one must have. My second point will be that India has become vulnerable in terms of its neighborhood policy, which I believe has been very poorly handled by Mr. Modi's government. And I say so without being very partisan here, in terms of not just Maldives and Sri Lanka, but you look at all the neighboring countries around us. I think the China's, whether it's in economic investment or whether it's through, strategic and military initiatives, but India appears to anybody who is following even basic level of diplomatic action in our neighborhood, India appears cornered. And I do want to add a point here that, like it or not, the truth remains that any political party which is representing India as a democracy abroad, you need to start charity beginning at home.
All right, Sanjay Jha, Sanju Verma, Mr. Kaju, Michael Kugelman and Sushant Sareen, thank you for joining us. In some time, we will have the bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. He's also due to meet with President Biden at some point during the course of the next few hours at the G7. And then, of course, post-midnight, there will be the cultural extravaganza. But what is really at stake for India and for the Global Committee of Nations? Why are they courting India at a time such as this. My colleague Anand Narasimhan spoke with Harsh Shringla, who is the former Foreign Secretary. In fact, Rahul Shivshankar spoke with Harsh Shringla, the former Foreign Secretary. I want to play out a chunk of that interview before we take a break.
Mr. Shringla, are we right to conclude that it is the G7 that needs India? That the opposition is wrong when it says that, we are going there and the Prime Minister is going there to only burnish his credentials and doing image control? And if you think that I'm right in concluding that the G7 needs India, I'm asking you, why is this the case?
Well, India has become a very major player on the global scenario. I think Prime Minister Modi's own status, his ability to contribute on issues of global importance have already been proven time and again, whether it's during the COVID crisis, whether it is during the G20 presidency of India, whether it is in terms of contributing to finding solutions to global challenges, whether the Ukraine conflict or the Middle East issue. I think Prime Minister Modi's perspective is a different perspective. It's a refreshing perspective and one that, the world appreciates and definitely wants to see India as a part of any global decision-making that is taking place, whether it's in the G7, G20, whether it's in BRICS or Quad or the SCO. I think India straddles that ideological space pretty north and south and east and west today, with Prime Minister Modi very much at the focus of global attention.
Well, that's why our top bands, viewers, if you look above you, our top bands actually encapsulate what Mr. Shringla is saying. Now, I want to ask you, Mr. Shringla, why does the G7 feel the need to invite India every year? I know it's an extension of the first question, but could you elaborate?
Well, I think it's also linked to the first question. The G7 understands that the developed countries by themselves have a certain limit in providing solutions to global challenges. They need to co-opt very prominent members who constitute today's multipolar world, whether it is India, whether it is countries like Brazil and Argentina, whether it is countries like, South Africa or Indonesia, but India certainly is at the forefront of countries that not only provide a perspective which is, let's say, different and one which I think in many senses seem to have the answers to solutions or to challenges that the developed world does not always find, but also in many senses we are seen as representing the aspirations of the developing world, the global south. We are also, I think, very much a country that is contributing to issues that are relevant to today's, world, whether it's technology, whether it is issues like, migration, whether it is issues like soft power. I think today's context, India's contribution is very, very clearly and tangibly recognized. Look at the G7's agenda. The G7's agenda is the Mediterranean and Africa. And these are areas which are India's extended neighborhood. We've been very involved with this region and we can provide perspectives that I think will be very, very welcome in this meeting. And the other issues which are important for the G7 are energy and food security. India is a major consumer of energy, a major purchaser of energy, and at the same time, major producer of food, whether it's wheat or rice, can also contribute very effectively, whether it's artificial intelligence or technology, which are also on the agenda, or migration, we are in a position to contribute. So I think Prime Minister Modi's presence and India's participation in G7 meetings since 2019 have been almost de rigueur now because of our contribution. We are not there because of, the representation factor. We are there because we are able to make that vital difference in contributing to the global agenda.
Democratic values. India's democratic ethos aligns with the G7, offering a responsible alternative to China's authoritarianism. Remember, viewers, we are coming out of the 2024 general elections, where Mr. Modi has been denied a full, simple majority. What does that tell you? That far from being in decline, India's democracy is actually, viewers, robust, and there are enough checks and balances to stop anyone from misusing the levers of power. Here is another hard fact, viewers. Global South representation. India bridges the gap with the Global South, incorporating perspectives from developing nations into global decision making. This is where it's at, viewers, in the Global South now. The West is, as you can see, it is pulsifying. It's in decline. Its economy splutters. The EU itself is in a shambles. China, as you can see, viewers, is also going through economic hardship. Its economy slid down. It's no longer the fastest growing, largest economy. That's India, viewers. And there are prospective other economies in the Global South that are catching up, poised to race ahead. Here's another fact. Strategically, geopolitically critical. India is fundamentally critical, viewers. India's presence counters China's influence, providing a strategic partner for the G7 in the Indo-Pacific region. And demography as destiny. Among all the G7 countries, only India's population is young while others are aging very, very quickly. Viewers, we are our own worst enemies. The Prime Minister is at the G7 today in Italy, representing rising India that is poised on superpower status. Instead of rallying behind the Prime Minister, a cantankerous debate has been sparked by the opposition, questioning the appropriateness of, in their words, an ek tihai or a one-third Prime Minister representing India. Clearly, in their refusal to accept defeat, the opposition led by the Congress has forgotten that Prime Ministers from within their own ranks, with an even lesser mandate, have not just attended but meaningfully represented India at G7 summits in the past. By the opposition's logic, even British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak
We don't sit often to have a conversation, and this is perhaps the first time that we are doing it in this manner, but it's always a pleasure to speak to a good friend, a very, very well-read author, lawyer, thinker, and someone who's very, very staunchly batting for Bharat. Sai Deepak, good to have you.
Pleasure.
So we are also getting into this avatar of a conversation, but let's try and keep it as freely-wheeling as possible. So from various aspects, I have a lot of questions to ask you.
Right.
But let's start with the NEET issue, because it's right there, right on the table, and you're in the thick of all of it. So where does it stand, and what is your understanding of what has happened?
So the big picture is this. I think there are a batch of petitions that have been filed before the Supreme Court, at least over the last 1 week or so. The results were announced on the 4th of June. I was engaged as the arguing counsel by Alak Pandey, who is also known as the physics wala. His petition was filed on the 9th, and we had to mention the matter before the bench, court number 12 of the Supreme Court, on the 11th, for it to be listed along with the other petitions, so that it could be taken up as seriously, or rather as quickly as possible, before the sense of urgency is lost. So the court suggested that we route it through the registry and mention the matter again, and on the 13th the matter was listed. Now, there are two sets of broad issues. One is the allegation with respect to the leak of the paper in certain centers. The second is with respect to the award of compensatory marks. To what tune and at what scale? These are the questions. Now, the bulk of the petitions which were filed were with respect to the alleged leak of the paper. I think then there were three other petitions, including ours, which dealt with the second issue of grace marks as well. So in our petition, or rather in Mr. Alak Pandey's petition, the question of paper leak as well as the grace marks were taken up together. Singhania and partners are the counsels on record for the matter, and I was engaged, I think, on the 10th night. And from what I understand based on the case papers and the material that I've read so far, an FIR, I think at least 2 FIRs seem to have been registered on the question of paper leak. I think one is in Bihar and perhaps the other is in Gujarat. As far as the second question is concerned, the problem I think arose when people realized that certain scores had been awarded which were mathematically impossible going by the structure of the examination. It's either +4 or something of that sort. So you could have scored 716 or 720, but you couldn't have scored 718 or 719. And that gave rise to questions as to what was the manner of calculation adopted here, how did this even happen? And then gradually it started emerging that compensatory marks had been awarded to students. And once questions were raised and petitions were filed before various courts, that is when I think the NTA came out with its first set of, with its first circular, clarifying that compensatory marks were indeed awarded. Until then, there was no statement from the NTA. Subsequently, between the 11th and the 13th, that is the day we mentioned the matter on the 11th, on that day, a set of FAQs were released, again explaining that compensatory marks were awarded to 1,563 students on the basis of who approached the court as petitioners on the subject. And then when we argued our matter on the 13th when it was listed, even before we could proceed to make our submissions, the counsel for the NTA volunteered with the minutes of a meeting, which was, rather there were 2 meetings held on the 11th and 12th of June, wherein internally it was, a decision was taken by the HPC, the high-powered committee of NTA, that they would cancel these compensatory marks of those 1,563 students, and they would be given an option of either retaking the test or retaining their scores without the compensatory marks. Now, once that suggestion was made, to some extent the issue, the second issue that we had raised was addressed in principle, but the issue that otherwise had been flagged also, apart from the question of the alleged paper leak and the need for greater scrutiny on that front, was that why should this benefit be limited to only those candidates who had approached the court?
Right.
Because after all, you're looking at students, they are not professional commercial litigants, they're 18-year-olds. Nobody writes an exam in the anticipation that they'd have to go against the examination agency itself to court. And from the 4th of June till date, there's been a flurry of activity on this front.
Yes.
So we said that even if this benefit is being extended, if it is limited only to those 1,563 students, it results in some kind of unfairness, and to put it bluntly, it would also result in Article 14 violation.
Correct.
Because if that benefit is being extended, it must be extended to all those people who have been awarded grace marks with or without basis. But the larger question, and typically in these examinations, one question that is asked is, assume for a moment that you grant grace marks. The possibility of grant of grace marks, that provision must be envisaged in the prospectus of the examination itself, saying these are the circumstances in which grace marks can be awarded. The only circumstance that the prospectus of NEET for this year speaks of, where such grace marks could have been awarded, is a circumstance exclusively for loss of time for physically challenged students and nobody else. So if there is no basis for that, and it's like a contract for all practical purposes, where a candidate knows what to expect and what not to expect, what are the eventualities in which additional marks may or may not be awarded. There is no such circumstance whatsoever in the prospectus. And until students went forth to courts asking this question, I believe that there was not too much of clarity coming from the NTA. That perhaps has led to a significant degree of concern as to why was this not told up front. That yes, that in certain centers, the question papers, the correct question papers reach 3 hours 20 minutes late, and therefore we have decided to extend this because this was completely outside the scope of control or possibility. We couldn't have envisaged this. Had they been upfront about it and actually made this clarification when the marks were released or when the results were announced, to some extent people would have understood. But then it so happens that the number of centers or to which this benefit was extended was initially 1, I think it was Savai Madhopur, and then they added 5 more centers, so totally 6 centers. So the position that's been taken before the Supreme Court is only 6 centers suffered from this. During the course of our arguments, it turns out that there were certain other counsels who were representing students who too had suffered this in other centers other than the 6 centers. Now that issue, therefore, according to me, is still outstanding. So based on yesterday's hearing and the recordal of the Supreme Court of the proposal of the NTA, today a circular has been released wherein they have limited the scope of this particular option to 1563 students, and the retest option is being made available on the 23rd of June for those students.
Correct.
Now, let's see whether there is some rethink on the government's part, because we specifically made the suggestion over and over again. And the video of the submissions made yesterday, the hearing is available in public domain, where we said that this window must be equally made available to all those candidates who are coming from other centers, but who have not had an opportunity to make a representation before the court, because it's been barely 10 days. People will take time to think and go to the court.
Correct.
So that's where the situation is. The larger picture being 24 lakh students have appeared. This is perhaps the competitive examination with the highest possible participation in the country so far. Even JEE is about 13 lakhs. And I'm told that around 571 cities with 4,750 centers, that's the cumulative figure that you're looking at. And there's been a sharp increase in the number of centers thanks to the inclusion of multiple tier 3 and tier 4 centers as part of this year's examination. So if there is, let's say, some lapse in arrangement, I can understand. But I think there are two other issues which need some kind of scrutiny. So what the court has done is that the question of paper leak, even in our petition, and those are the petitions which are specifically on this subject, have been posted for 8th of July, but the court has not granted a stay on the counselling. On the question of compensatory marks, based on the proposal given by the government, or rather the NTA, this solution has been worked out. But I think more can be done even on this front. And at the very least,
somewhere one would feel that the NTA should come out and say these are the total number of students who have been given compensatory marks, and we give all of them a chance to go back and reappear or go back with the old.
So I think the NTA is trying to balance two different concerns. If you were in their shoes, I think that's what they'd be concerned. And I heard from a certain other set of educators also that this could be one of the concerns, which is, assume for a moment that you make the option available randomly.
Presented by.
And US President Joe Biden, who looks set to lose impending national elections in their respective countries, would have no moral right to attend the G7. This, viewers, is how bankrupt the opposition's thinking is. Let's not forget that PM Modi is not imposing himself upon the G7. On the contrary, he has been invited. The facts tell us that no other Indian Prime Minister has been invited to attend more G7 meets than Narendra Modi. In fact, ever since 2019, India has been invited to every single G7 summit meet. So much so that there's talk that India might even be invited to become a permanent G7 member. Now, viewers, look at what the opposition has been saying, despite India's rising clout. And let me quote Jairam Ramesh, who is, of course, the most visible face of the Congress party in the public domain. He says, a one-third Prime Minister doesn't acknowledge history. Since 2003, India was invited for G7 summits, salvaging his diminished international image. That's the reason why the Prime Minister is attending this particular summit meeting, says Jairam Ramesh, who is, of course, the head of the Congress communications cell. Gaurav Gogoi, Congress MP, who is also cut out for big tasks in the upcoming Lok Sabha, says, amid the NEET row, the NEET row, Prime Minister has left for G7 summit, implying that he's neglecting his duties at home. Then you have the Samajwadi Party, viewers, the ally of the Congress, an important stakeholder of the India alliance. The gentleman on your screen, Mr. Abbas Haider, says, PM Modi's policies have failed India. He's using events now for image management. Now, what the opposition is not telling you is that India's heft has risen astronomically under Modi since 2014. It is also not telling you that Modi is not representing himself in Italy. He is in fact there because he happens to be the head of the executive of one of, if not the most respected nations of the world. Bharat is in demand today. It is the #1 global success story without exaggeration. It is growing much faster than any other large economy. It has the fastest falling poverty rates. It has, viewers,
It's day 2 of the G7 summit here in Italy, and we have a lot of developments to share with you. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived here late last night. He had a busy day today. G7 sessions, multiple bilaterals, even a chat with the Pope. We'll bring you all the top highlights of the second day of the G7 summit from Italy. Also, this is the first foreign visit for Prime Minister Modi in his third term. So what does it mean for India-Italy relations? And what is his message for the rest of the world? Why did the Pope talk about artificial intelligence at the G7? Why is Africa a top focus for the Italian Prime Minister here? How will Italy become a transport hub? We'll bring you a ground report from the port of Bari and a special report on the G7 host, Giorgia Meloni, how she overcame the far-right tag to become a darling of the West. All this and more coming up. The headlines first.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says peace talks with Ukraine can begin, but only if Kyiv gives up 4 of its regions and abandons its NATO membership bid. Putin's conditions come just ahead of the Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland. Ukraine rejects Putin's proposal, calls his terms unacceptable. Myanmar junta orders evacuations around its embattled state capital. Sittwe City is one of the few holdouts for the junta troops in the western Rakhine state. It is also home to an India-backed deep sea port and around 200,000 people. In India, rains trigger flash floods and landslides in Sikkim. At least 6 people killed. More than 1,000 tourists stranded as the Tista River overflows. The landslides have blocked several roads, inundated homes, and swept away a bridge. Niger's top court lifts the immunity of overthrown President Mohamed Bazoum. This paves the way for a possible trial. Bazoum was ousted in a military coup in July 2023. He is accused of treason, financing terrorism, and plotting to undermine the state. And Afghanistan confirmed their growing status as the dark horses of the 2024 T20 World Cup. They beat Papua New Guinea by 7 wickets. Afghanistan now advanced to the Super 8 phase of the competition. But their win has sent New Zealand out of the tournament.